It's been nearly 10 years since that night, but the memory is still as sharp as the air up in the Cascades, where I was camping with a group of kids and teachers. Early October 2014, cold mist hanging low, a soft drizzle tapping against the tents. I was there, guiding a school trip like I'd done every year. The sky had already darkened, and we'd just finished a late dinner when I heard the first knock. It wasn't from one of the kids or any of the chaperones. No, it sounded like someone was hitting a tree with a branch. I thought it was a bear, just something usual for the area. But that's not what I found. A little boy, Tommy, had gone missing. No one knew where he'd wandered off to. It wasn't until hours later, just as the wind started picking up, that I heard something. A heavy breathing. And then I saw it. I still have the footage on an old phone in my desk drawer. I thought the worst part would be the video. It wasn't. It's easy to forget how quiet it can get up in those mountains when you're used to the city. We had everything set up by dusk, tents arranged in a perfect circle near the tree line, the kids sitting around the fire, half listening to the stories from the older teachers. The air was thick with the smell of wet pine needles and wood smoke. I remember feeling that pull of peace. You know the feeling. Like nothing could go wrong out there. My focus was on keeping an eye on the kids, making sure no one strayed too far from the light. Tommy, the youngest at just 8 years old, was playing near the edge of the woods with 2 other boys. His mother had signed the permission slip late, apologizing 3 times for almost making him miss the trip. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary that first night. The rain had stopped, the fire was crackling, and the stars were starting to peek through the clouds overhead. We'd done this trip every October for the past 6 years. Same route up Highway 20, same campground near Rainy Pass, same stories about the old logging roads. The parents trusted us. The school board approved it every year without question. I'd been teaching outdoor education for 12 years by then, and I prided myself on never having a serious incident, not even a sprained ankle. The other chaperones were experienced too. Linda, a retired forest ranger who knew every trail in the North Cascades, and Marcus, a parent volunteer who'd grown up hunting these mountains. We had satellite phones, first aid kits, and a detailed itinerary filed with the ranger station 20 miles south. Everything was by the book. But that night, sitting by the fire, watching the kids roast marshmallows and tell ghost stories, I felt something I hadn't felt before. A weight in the air. Linda felt it too. She kept looking toward the dark trees, her hand resting on the flashlight clipped to her belt. By the time the campfire had dwindled down to orange coals, Tommy was nowhere to be found. I checked the campgrounds again, calling out his name into the silent woods, my voice echoing back to me. The crickets weren't chirping like they should have been, and that's when I felt it, the absence of sound. Something was wrong. I remembered the rumors, those whispers that circulated among the old-timers about things moving through the trees at night. But no, this wasn't one of those stories. This was real. This was a child missing in 38-degree weather with no jacket. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe he'd just wandered off to the wrong tent, maybe fallen asleep in someone else's sleeping bag. But as the hours passed and we gathered more search parties, splitting up with flashlights and whistles, the reality set in. Tommy was lost. Linda took charge immediately, organizing us into search grids, assigning each group a section of forest to cover. Marcus called the ranger station on the satellite phone while I woke the other kids and asked if anyone had seen Tommy leave the fire. No one had. One girl said she thought she saw him walking toward the bathroom area, but that was almost an hour ago. We checked the pit toilets twice. Nothing. His tent was empty, his sleeping bag still rolled up in its stuff sack. I felt my chest tighten. The temperature was dropping fast, and the mist was rolling back in from the valley below. A child could get hypothermic in these conditions within a few hours. I kept my voice calm when I radioed the other teams. But inside, I was starting to panic. The forest at night is a different world. Even experienced adults get disoriented. An 8-year-old boy didn't stand a chance. The search continued through the night, our flashlight beams cutting through the mist like thin yellow threads. A group of us were walking through the thick brush, calling Tommy's name every 30 seconds when we heard the first sound. It wasn't the rustling of an animal, no, this was different. 3 knocks, loud, deliberate, spaced about 2 seconds apart. I froze, and my heart dropped into my stomach. We all exchanged uneasy glances in the darkness. Nobody said the word out loud, but I could feel it in the air, heavy with the silence that followed. The knocking sound echoed from the trees, distant but somehow close, like it was coming from multiple directions at once. Linda's face went pale in the flashlight beam. She'd heard that sound before, she admitted later. 20 years ago, when she was still working for the Forest Service. She'd never told anyone about it. Marcus asked if it could be another search party signaling us, but we all knew better. We were the only people within 5 miles, and besides, we had radios and whistles for signaling. This was something else. The knock came again, 3 times, same rhythm, same hollow wooden sound. It seemed to move through the forest, circling our position. I don't even like saying Bigfoot, but that's what it was. That's what the old loggers used to talk about. Wood knocking. A territorial display. I'd always dismissed it as folklore, as something people made up to explain elk rubbing against trees or branches falling in the wind. But standing there in the dark, hearing those deliberate, measured knocks echoing through the Cascades, I couldn't deny it anymore. We kept moving, following Tommy's last known direction, but the knocking had rattled us. Every shadow seemed to move, every branch snap made us jump. I radioed the main camp and told them what we'd heard, trying to keep my voice steady. The response crackled back. Probably just a bear or a woodpecker. But it was 3 a.m. Woodpeckers don't knock at 3 a.m, and bears don't knock in patterns. We pressed deeper into the forest, our lights bobbing through the undergrowth, and that's when we found the first clue. Tommy's jacket was hanging from a low branch about a quarter mile from camp, soaked with rain and mist. His backpack was missing. But there was something else there that made my skin crawl. A smell. Deep, musky, like wet fur mixed with earth and something almost human. It hung in the air around the jacket, so strong it made my eyes water. I'd smelled bears before. This wasn't a bear. This was something bigger. Something that left a scent like a marker, like it wanted us to know it had been there. Linda picked up the jacket carefully, examining it for tears or blood. It was intact, just wet, like someone had gently removed it and placed it there for us to find. Marcus found the footprints 30 feet away. They were massive, at least 17 inches long, pressed deep into the mud near a fallen log. 5 toes, a broad heel, a high arch. Human-shaped, but wrong, too large, too wide. The stride length between prints was over 6 feet. I measured it twice with my flashlight beam, not believing my eyes. Whatever made these tracks was walking upright on 2 legs, and it was carrying something heavy. The prints led away from camp, deeper into the forest, toward the old growth timber where the trees grew so thick the sun barely reached the ground. We radioed back to camp. The ranger station had been contacted, and they were sending a team at first light. But we couldn't wait. Tommy had been missing for 4 hours now. The temperature was dropping below freezing. We had to keep moving. So we followed the tracks, 3 of us, leaving a trail of glow sticks behind us so we could find our way back. The prints went on for almost a mile, weaving between massive Douglas firs and crossing 2 small creeks. And then they just stopped. In the middle of a clearing, the tracks ended. No more prints, no sign of Tommy, just the smell still hanging in the air and the sound of the forest breathing around us. That's when we heard the knocking again. 3 times. Closer now, maybe 50 yards away. And then a 4th knock, answering from the opposite direction. We froze in the clearing, our flashlights scanning the tree line, but we saw nothing except the dark silhouettes of pines swaying in the wind. The knocking continued, a conversation between unseen participants, echoing through the valley. I felt small, exposed, like we'd stumbled into something we weren't supposed to see. Linda grabbed my arm and whispered that we needed to go back. Marcus agreed. We were out of our depth, but I couldn't leave Tommy out here, not with whatever was making those sounds. I called his name one more time, my voice breaking. Silence. Then, from somewhere in the darkness ahead, a sound that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite animal. A low, resonant whoop that vibrated in my chest. It lasted 3 seconds and then cut off abruptly. We retreated back to camp, following our glow sticks, moving faster than we should have through the underbrush. Behind us, I could hear branches breaking, heavy footfalls keeping pace with us just beyond the reach of our flashlights. Whatever it was following us back, making sure we left. When we finally reached the camp perimeter, the sound stopped. The forest went quiet again. The other teachers and parent volunteers were gathered around the fire, their faces drawn with worry. The kids were all accounted for, huddled in their tents, frightened by the commotion. I reported what we'd found to the group: the jacket, the footprints, the sounds. Some of them looked skeptical. Others just looked scared. At dawn, the official search and rescue team arrived from Marblemount. 8 volunteers with dogs, radios, and thermal imaging equipment. They were professional, efficient, asking all the right questions. I showed them the area where we'd found the jacket. The footprints were still there, though the rain had started to wash them away. The SAR coordinator examined them briefly and said they were probably just elk prints or bear tracks distorted by the mud. I didn't argue. What was I going to say? That I thought Bigfoot took Tommy? They'd have pulled me off the search immediately. So I stayed quiet and followed their instructions. By mid-morning, we had 30 people combing the forest in organized grids. The dogs picked up Tommy's scent near the jacket but lost it at the clearing where the tracks had stopped. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. His mother arrived by helicopter around noon, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. I had to tell her we hadn't found him yet, watching her crumble in front of me. She kept asking what happened, how we let this happen, why he was alone. I had no answers. The guilt was crushing. This was my trip, my responsibility. A child was missing on my watch. The sheriff's deputies arrived next, treating the campsite like a crime scene, asking questions about who saw Tommy last, whether there were any suspicious people in the area. I kept thinking about those footprints, that smell, those knocks. But I said nothing. That night, 24 hours after Tommy disappeared, we gathered at the campfire under a gray sky that threatened more rain. The search teams were exhausted. The dogs had found nothing. The thermal imaging had picked up deer and possibly a bear, but no sign of a child. The official consensus was that Tommy had wandered off, gotten disoriented, and was probably sheltering under a log or in a hollow tree somewhere. They'd expand the search radius at first light, but I knew something they didn't. I'd gone back to that clearing in the afternoon with Marcus, and we'd found something new. Stacked stones, 6 river rocks, stacked in a cairn that was definitely not natural. And next to it, a small arrangement of pine branches woven together in a pattern that looked almost like a nest. Someone, or something, had been there after we left. Linda joined us by the fire, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She was quiet for a long time, just staring into the flames. Then she told us a story. Back in 1994, when she was working a fire watch tower near Stehekin, a young girl had gone missing during a family camping trip. The search went on for 3 days. Then, on the 4th morning, the girl walked back into camp on her own. She was unharmed, clean, well-fed. She said a big furry man had taken care of her, kept her warm, fed her berries and fish. The authorities assumed she'd been confused, maybe suffering from exposure, but Linda had seen the footprints around the area where the girl was found. She'd measured them herself, 17 inches long, 5 toes. The same prints we'd found today. The Forest Service told her to keep quiet about it, not to frighten the public. So she did. For 20 years, she kept that secret. I felt something shift in my chest as she spoke. This wasn't just folklore. This wasn't mass hysteria or misidentified animals. Something was out here in these mountains. Something that moved through the forest like a shadow. Something that knew we were looking for Tommy. And maybe, just maybe, It was trying to help. The thought should have terrified me, but instead, I felt a strange sense of hope. If Bigfoot had taken Tommy, if it was protecting him from the cold and the predators, then maybe he was still alive. Maybe we'd been searching the wrong way. Maybe we needed to stop treating this like a typical lost child case and start thinking about this as something else entirely. Something unprecedented. That's when we heard the knocking again. 3 times. Then 3 more. Coming from the same direction as the night before. Everyone around the fire heard it this time. There was no denying it. No pretending it was a woodpecker or falling branches. The SAR coordinator stood up, grabbed his radio and called it in. But even as he spoke, describing the sound in official terms, I could see the doubt in his eyes. He knew. We all knew. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in my tent, listening to the sounds of the forest, wondering where Tommy was, whether he was scared, whether he was even still alive. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something moving outside the tent circle. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Not the sharp clicks of deer hooves or the shuffle of a bear. Something walking upright, bipedal. I unzipped my tent as quietly as I could and peered out into the darkness. The fire had burned down to coals, casting a dim orange glow across the clearing. And there, just beyond the reach of the light, I saw it. A silhouette. Massive, at least 8 feet tall, broad-shouldered, covered in what looked like dark fur. It stood completely still, watching the camp, watching us. My breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. Every instinct told me to scream, to run, to wake everyone up. But I didn't. Something about the way it stood there, calm and patient, made me hesitate. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't moving toward us. It was just watching, observing, making sure we were safe. I reached for my phone, the old one I kept for emergencies, and slowly raised it up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I hit record. The screen's dim light illuminated my tent for a brief second, and in that moment, the creature shifted. It turned its head toward me. I could see its eyes reflecting in the glow, amber and intelligent. We locked gazes for what felt like an eternity. Then it took a step back, melting into the shadows, and was gone. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd seen. Not right away. How could I? Who would believe me? The video I'd captured was shaky, dark, mostly just shadows and trees. You could see something, a shape, a movement, but nothing definitive. Nothing that would convince a skeptic. But I knew what I'd seen. Bigfoot. The word felt strange in my mind, like saying it would make it less real. But that's what it was. That's what had taken Tommy. And now it was watching over us, making sure we didn't venture too far into its territory, making sure we were safe while it protected the boy. The next morning was the 3rd day of the search. Tommy's mother was barely holding herself together. Her sister had flown in from Seattle to support her. The media had picked up the story. News crews were setting up at the ranger station. The pressure was mounting. The sheriff was talking about calling in state resources, expanding the search to cover 50 square miles. But I had a different idea. At the morning briefing, I suggested we stop the aggressive grid search and instead leave food and supplies at the clearing where we'd found the jacket. Let Tommy find his way back. The SAR coordinator looked at me like I was insane, but Linda backed me up. She suggested it couldn't hurt, that sometimes lost children hide from search parties because they're scared. They let us try it. We left a backpack at the clearing with water, granola bars, a warm jacket, and a bright orange safety vest. We tied a whistle to the outside and attached a note in large letters. Tommy, we're at camp, follow the creek downstream. Then we pulled back, keeping a distant watch from 100 yards away. The official search teams continued working other areas, but Linda, Marcus, and I stayed near the clearing, hidden behind a fallen log, waiting. Hours passed. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, casting long shadows through the old-growth forest. The smell was back, that musky, earthy scent that made my hair stand on end. And then we heard it. Not knocking this time. Footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate. From the dense underbrush beyond the clearing, Bigfoot emerged into the light. It was massive, even larger than I'd thought from seeing its silhouette. Its fur was dark brown, almost black in places, lighter on the chest. The face was flat, human-like but wider, with a pronounced brow and dark eyes that looked impossibly aware. It walked upright with a slight hunch, its arms long and muscular, hanging past its knees, and in those arms, cradled against its chest like a sleeping infant, was Tommy. The boy was wrapped in what looked like woven moss and bark, his head resting against the creature's shoulder. He appeared to be asleep, unharmed, peaceful. I wanted to run toward them, to grab Tommy and bring him back, but Linda's hand clamped down on my arm, holding me in place. "Don't move," she whispered. "Let it finish." The creature walked to the backpack we'd left, knelt down with surprising grace, and gently laid Tommy on the ground beside it. Then it took the jacket from the bag and carefully draped it over the sleeping boy. For a moment, Bigfoot just crouched there, one massive hand resting on Tommy's head, almost like a blessing. Then it looked up, directly at our hiding spot. It knew we were there. It had always known. Our eyes met for the second time. There was no menace in that gaze, no threat, just something that looked almost like sadness, or maybe understanding. Then it stood, turned, and vanished back into the forest without a sound. We waited 30 seconds. Then we ran to Tommy. He was warm, breathing steadily, his pulse strong. There were no injuries, no signs of hypothermia or exposure. His clothes were clean. His face was peaceful. He looked like he'd just woken from a good night's sleep. Linda radioed the medical team while I cradled him in my arms. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Mr. Harrison?" he mumbled. "Where am I?" I told him he was safe, that we'd found him, that everything was going to be okay. He looked around, confused, like he was trying to remember something. "There was a big," he started, then trailed off, his eyes unfocused. "I don't remember." The authorities were called, and Tommy was airlifted to the hospital in Everett for observation. The doctors examined him thoroughly and found nothing wrong. No injuries, no signs of trauma, no hypothermia. His core temperature was normal. He was well hydrated. He even had food in his stomach, partially digested berries and what looked like salmon. They chalked it up to a miracle. A lost child who somehow survived 3 days in the wilderness on his own. The official report stated that Tommy had wandered away from camp, gotten disoriented, and survived by eating berries and drinking from streams until he found his way back to a location where search teams could find him. They made no mention of the footprints, the knocking sounds, or the woven moss blanket he'd been wrapped in. Those details never made it into the report. None of us, not a single teacher or chaperone, ever spoke of the truth. How could we? We all saw it. Linda, Marcus, and I stood there in that clearing and watched Bigfoot carry Tommy back and lay him gently on the ground. But it was too strange, too impossible to admit. If we told the truth, we'd be ridiculed, investigated, maybe even lose our jobs. Tommy's mother would be horrified. The school board would shut down the outdoor education program. So we made a choice. We agreed to stick to the official story, to let the world believe what it wanted to believe, that Tommy had survived on his own, that he was a lucky, resilient child. Nothing more. Tommy himself had no memory of the 3 days. The doctor said it was likely dissociative amnesia, a trauma response where the brain blocks out frightening experiences. Maybe that was true. Or maybe whatever had protected him had given him a gift, the gift of forgetting, of not having to carry the weight of knowing what lived in those mountains. Either way, he couldn't tell anyone about Bigfoot because he genuinely didn't remember. He told the investigators he remembered being lost, feeling scared, and then waking up with me holding him. Everything in between was gone. The media ate it up. The miracle child who survived the Cascades. His mother gave tearful interviews thanking God and the search teams. Tommy went home a week later, Life went back to normal, or so everyone thought, but I kept the video. That shaky, dark, indistinct footage of something massive standing at the edge of our camp. I watched it probably 50 times in the weeks after the trip, trying to convince myself it was real, trying to see more detail in the shadows. The video proved nothing to anyone else. To an outside observer, it just looked like nighttime forest footage with some vague shapes. Could be a bear standing on hind legs. Could be a trick of the light. Could be anything. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew that somewhere in those mountains, Bigfoot was still there, still watching, still protecting something we'd never fully understand. Years passed. I moved away from Washington, took a teaching job in Oregon, tried to put the night behind me. The outdoor education program at my old school continued for one more year, then quietly shut down due to budget cuts. Linda retired and moved to Arizona. Marcus went back to his normal life. We kept in touch for a while, exchanging emails every few months, but eventually, even that faded. We all wanted to forget. Tommy grew up, graduated high school, went to college. I followed his progress through social media. He seemed happy, normal, well-adjusted. He studied biology at Western Washington University, got married young to his high school sweetheart, had 2 kids of his own. From the outside, it looked like the incident hadn't affected him at all. But it affected me. Some nights, especially in autumn when the air turns cold and the rain starts falling, I hear those knocks again in my memory. 3 slow knocks, spaced 2 seconds apart. I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I smell that musky, earthy scent in my bedroom. I check the windows, knowing I won't see anything, but checking anyway. My wife thinks I have PTSD from the incident. She's probably right. But it's not from the trauma of losing a child on my watch. It's from the weight of knowing. From carrying a secret so big that it changes how you see the world. From understanding that there are things in this world, ancient things that we're not supposed to see or understand. Sometimes I think about that moment when Bigfoot looked at me in the clearing. That exchange of understanding between 2 completely different beings. What was it trying to tell me? Was it asking me to keep the secret? To protect it the way it had protected Tommy? I like to think so. I like to think we made a silent agreement that day. I wouldn't tell the world about what I'd seen, and it would leave us in peace. A truce between humanity and something older, something that existed in these mountains long before we arrived. The thought gives me comfort on nights when the memories become too vivid. I never shared the video. It sits on that old phone in my desk drawer, the battery long dead, the device obsolete. I've thought about charging it up, looking at the footage one more time, but I never do. Part of me is afraid that if I watch it again, I'll see something different. Or worse, that I'll see nothing at all, just shadows and trees. And I'll have to admit that maybe it was all in my head. Maybe the stress and fear of losing Tommy created a shared delusion among Linda, Marcus, and me. Maybe we saw what we wanted to see, a supernatural explanation for something that was actually mundane. But I don't really believe that. I know what I saw was real. Bigfoot was real, and somewhere in the Cascades it's still there. It's hard to talk about even now. I hate that word, Bigfoot. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like something from a bad reality TV show or a tabloid newspaper. But what happened that night wasn't a joke. It was real. And it was something that's changed me, changed all of us who were there. I just hope I can make peace with it someday. Tommy doesn't know what we went through to find him. He doesn't know what carried him through those 3 days, keeping him warm and fed and safe from the mountain lions and bears that roam those forests. He's grown up now, with his own family, his own life. I wonder sometimes if he dreams about it, if somewhere deep in his subconscious, he remembers the feeling of being cradled in those massive arms, of being protected by something that shouldn't exist. I saw him once, about 5 years ago. I was driving through Bellingham and stopped at a coffee shop. He was there with his wife and their newborn daughter. He didn't recognize me at first. Why would he? I was just the outdoor education teacher from a scary weekend when he was 8 years old. But when I introduced myself, his face lit up. He thanked me for helping find him, for not giving up on the search. We talked for a few minutes. He told me he was teaching biology now at a middle school, taking kids on nature walks, helping them understand ecosystems and wildlife. He said that experience in the mountains, even though he couldn't remember most of it, had given him a deep respect for nature, made him want to protect wild places. I wanted to tell him the truth then. I wanted to say that something incredible had protected him, something that proved nature was more mysterious and magical than any textbook could explain. But I didn't. I just smiled and said I was glad he was doing well. The burden of silence is heavier than you'd think. Every time I see a news story about Bigfoot, every time some hunter claims to have seen one or found footprints, I want to speak up. I want to say I've seen it too. I have proof. I have a video. But I stay quiet. Because what would that accomplish? My shaky, dark footage wouldn't convince anyone who doesn't already believe. It would just invite ridicule and harassment. And worse, it might bring attention to those mountains. Hunters and researchers and curiosity seekers all tramping through the forest looking for Bigfoot, disrupting its territory, putting it in danger. No, the secret is safer kept. The creature is safer if the world keeps thinking it's just folklore, just another campfire story that parents tell to keep kids from wandering too far from the tent. That's what I tell myself anyway. That's how I justify the silence. We never went back to that camp, that specific location near Rainy Pass. It sits there still, probably. The old fire ring filled with leaves and soil. The spots where our tents stood reclaimed by the forest. Nature has a way of erasing human presence. Give it enough time, and everything we build, everything we mark, disappears. Maybe that's how Bigfoot has survived so long, by being patient, by waiting for us to leave, to move on, to forget. We always think we can control everything. The forest, the animals, the land. We map it, name it, claim it as our own. But some things are bigger than us. Some things were here first and will be here long after we're gone. Things we don't understand and maybe aren't meant to understand. I've thought a lot about why it saved Tommy. Why it didn't just leave him to the elements or ignore his cries for help. Maybe it saw something in him, some innocence or potential that was worth protecting. Or maybe it was just doing what any intelligent being would do when they found a lost child. Helping. Simplest explanation is often the right one. Bigfoot wasn't a monster or a myth. It was just another creature living in those mountains, one with enough intelligence and compassion to recognize a child in need. That thought brings me more comfort than fear. The idea that we share this world with something powerful and good. Something that chooses to stay hidden not because it's afraid of us, but because it's wise enough to avoid us. I've also wondered if it had young of its own. If maybe it understood what it would mean for a parent to lose a child. If maybe saving Tommy was an act of empathy, one parent helping another across species lines. I'll never know for sure. But sometimes, late at night when I'm lying in bed and the wind is howling through the trees outside, I think about that moment in the clearing, the way Bigfoot placed that jacket so carefully over Tommy, the way it looked at us afterward, making sure we'd found him before it disappeared. There was something gentle in that gesture, something almost human, or maybe something better than human. Maybe that's what I learned that night. That being human doesn't make us the most intelligent, most compassionate, or most important creatures on this planet. Maybe there are others who do those things better than we ever could. I won't lie to you. There are times when I wish I hadn't seen it. Times when the weight of the secret feels crushing, when I want to shout the truth from the rooftops just to be free of it. But there are other times, late at night when the world is quiet, when I remember the way the creature held Tommy, and I can't help but feel grateful. Grateful that something in those mountains chose to help us. Grateful that I got to witness it. Grateful that Tommy came home safe. That gratitude outweighs the burden. Most days anyway. And then, last week, I heard it again. 3 knocks, clear as day, echoing through the night air. Just outside my window here in Oregon, 100 miles south of where it all happened. I know what I heard, and I know why. Bigfoot is still out there, moving through these mountains, following the old migration routes that predate our highways and cities. And I'm still here, carrying the memory, carrying the secret. The story isn't finished. It never will be. Because every autumn when the rain starts and the mist rolls through the valleys, I'll remember. I'll remember that somewhere in the darkness, in the quiet spaces between our world and theirs, Bigfoot walks. And maybe, just maybe, it remembers too. Remembers the small boy it saved. Remembers the teacher who kept it secret. Remembers that night when two species reached across the impossible distance and found understanding.